Picture a massive two-story house with a private airstrip behind it and a boat bobbing on the waves near the ocean shore. In this dwelling lived the MacIvor family, two lovers in a tropical forest. They were preparing to become parents, but their dream was brutally shattered one dark night. Susan Michelle MacIvor was born on July 24, 1962, in Pennsylvania. From early childhood, everyone called her Missy. She was an incredibly kind, responsive person who adored spending time with young children. In all her games, she played the role of a mother or caregiver. Her affection for little ones grew into a desire to teach them important and useful things, so Missy decided to become a teacher. Due to her agreeable and peaceful nature, she was loved by both children and adults. She had a knack for explaining complex concepts in simple terms. People felt at ease in her presence, making teaching her true calling. After finishing high school, Missy enrolled at Florida International University to finally pursue her dream of becoming an educator. While living in Florida, she occasionally visited local bars with her friends to unwind and have fun. It was there that a young man named Tim noticed her. They met and chatted briefly before returning to their respective groups. Tim wasn't looking for a life partner, as he already had a girlfriend, but Missy managed to capture his attention somehow. Tim only remembered the attractive stranger a week later when he went to the same bar with his younger brother. Michael MacIvor was just over 20 years old. Despite his age, he was a determined, responsible person. He set goals for himself and persistently worked towards achieving them. At that point, Michael decided it was time to settle down, start a family, have children, and focus on building his own future. He shared this with his older brother Tim at the bar. The thing is, being engrossed in masculine pursuits, Michael was completely inexperienced in approaching girls and felt somewhat shy around them. It was then that Tim, Michael's older brother, recalled the lovely stranger he had met and exchanged a few words with at the bar just a week ago. He pictured her gentle, sweet gaze, endearing smile, and thought such a girl would be perfect for his modest brother. As if by magic, Missy entered the nightclub accompanied by a friend. Perhaps it was destiny, love at first sight. Tim hadn't even said a word yet, but Michael couldn't take his eyes off the girl of his dreams. The young people met, and after that, they were practically inseparable. Friends, over 90% of viewers watch videos without subscribing to the channel. Check if you're subscribed. If not, please be so kind as to subscribe to the channel to support me. They talked all night long, and just a few weeks after meeting, officially declared themselves a couple. They were two kindred spirits, seemingly destined from above to be together for life and die on the same day. Missy managed to bring out the best qualities in the modest young man, while Michael awakened and elevated her feminine appeal to a new level. Michael MacIvor was born on April 15, 1961, in Ohio. Besides him, the family had 3 other children, 2 brothers, Tim and James, and a sister, Sharon. As it happened, Michael's fate was linked to airplanes from birth, following in his parents' footsteps. His mother obtained a pilot's license at 16, which was quite rare at the time. Later, she worked as a flight attendant. Michael's father was an airline pilot, so the MacIvors' entire life was closely tied to the sky. Naturally, the boys also became fascinated with planes. From childhood, they spent all their free time at the airfield, observing mechanics at work and studying aircraft structure. As he grew older, Michael, like his parents, made aviation his life's work. From age 13, he flew with his father and learned to operate a plane, and by 17, he could easily repair aircraft engines, devise new concepts, and experiment with airliner equipment. To supplement his practical skills with theory, Michael graduated from the University of Miami and became a professional pilot. He continued his parents' legacy, making aviation his profession. Over time, he also became the owner of an aircraft repair company. Michael was intelligent and enterprising. Not wanting to rest on his laurels, he decided that his future family should definitely live in paradise. He chose Key West, Florida, as their residence, primarily because it was an ideal place to raise future children. In 1989, Michael and Missy relocated to their dream home in a small town called Tavernier. The two-story house was magnificent. A spacious, glassed-in veranda encircled the building's perimeter at the second-floor level. But the dwelling's uniqueness lay in the private airstrip adjacent to it. Residents of this community could land their planes right behind their own homes. In addition, Michael and Missy owned a boat, so besides flying, they could enjoy water excursions, go diving, and fish. It was an ideal place to live, a tropical paradise with few inhabitants. In May 1990, Michael and Missy officially formalized their relationship. They had already achieved what they wanted, so they decided against a lavish wedding, instead holding the ceremony in their backyard with only their closest friends and family. In January of the following year, they learned exciting news. The young wife was pregnant. The couple had long dreamed of having children. They planned to have several sons and daughters, but the arrival of their firstborn was always the most thrilling event for expectant parents. Michael and Missy began preparing the nursery. They learned the baby's gender in advance. It was to be a boy. They even chose a name, Kyle Patrick MacIvor. Michael was 30, Missy 29. They were happy, working at jobs they loved, had a splendid home, and the arrival of their son was set to elevate their relationship to an entirely new level. By then, Michael was thriving in his business, while Missy was a beloved elementary school teacher. The children adored her and eagerly rushed to class for her lessons. Soon, their home would be filled with a baby's cries. In their spare time, husband and wife painted walls themselves, bought furniture and toys for the nursery. The mother-to-be was very proud of the baby's bedroom, showing it off to all their guests. To finish everything before the child's birth, the couple hired a contractor for home renovations. Preparing for the baby's arrival was the most exciting time for Missy. She was already in her 8th month of pregnancy and in just a couple of weeks anticipated the arrival of little Kyle into this world. Unfortunately, their entire life, woven from love and happiness, would be brutally shattered in one night, and nothing they had planned would ever come to pass. On that fateful evening of August 21st, 1991, the MacIvor couple returned from a parenting class late, around 9 p.m. A powerful tropical storm had erupted. Michael and Missy managed to take shelter under their home's roof from the approaching rain driven by strong winds. Such natural phenomena are not uncommon in a tropical climate, so the storm only slightly dampened their clothes as husband and wife exited the car. The next morning, it was as if the hurricane had never happened. The sun shone, and the only reminders of the bad weather were scattered palm leaves and branches everywhere. Everything was proceeding as usual, except that Missy didn't show up for classes. The school administration tried to call the MacIvors, but no one answered. Colleagues immediately became concerned, as Missy's due date was approaching, so anything could have happened. School staff called Michael's sister Sharon to find out where the couple had disappeared to, but she also didn't understand what was going on. Her brother hadn't called her, and none of the relatives knew where the husband and wife had gone. Sharon knew they couldn't have left without informing their loved ones, and she immediately had a bad feeling. Just in case, the woman called the police, asking them to check if everything was all right at her brother's house. Meanwhile, 2 of Missy's colleagues were already standing at the MacIvors' front door, futilely trying to get the owner's attention. The doors were locked, and no one appeared in response to the knocking. The women decided to walk around the house and peer through the windows. Perhaps Missy had fallen ill and needed help, but instead of the pregnant woman, they glimpsed someone's legs through the living room window. Terrified, the school employees rushed to the nearest house and asked a neighbor for help. The man didn't wait for the police to arrive, kicking down the door. He hurried, hoping to provide necessary aid to the victim. But as soon as he glanced at Michael's body lying in the living room, and it was indeed him, the neighbor realized there was nothing he could do to help. The horrifying crime in a private gated community was shocking in itself, not to mention that it happened to the MacIvors, a family adored by everyone in the area. Police arriving at the scene immediately called in a forensics team, as there was clear evidence of a crime. Officers methodically searched the large house, trying to note any clues. Not all rooms were inhabited. Some were still undergoing renovation. Paint cans stood everywhere with newspapers and building materials on the floor. The house itself was a two-level structure with several entrances. The second-floor rooms could be accessed directly from outside via a glass-enclosed veranda, which had its own staircase. At first glance, there were no signs of struggle or forced entry in the house. Things were generally in their places, considering the ongoing renovations. The living room also seemed undisturbed. Sofa, TV, coffee table, and right behind the sofa lay the lifeless homeowner. It appeared he had been attacked as he was preparing for bed. The man wore a red and white striped undershirt, light shorts, and white socks. He was lying on his back, legs splayed. His eyes and mouth were covered with white socks and wrapped with painter's tape. The remaining roll of tape still lay on the coffee table, inches from Michael's body. Some blood had flowed from his nose, staining his shirt, and visible bruises marked his neck. It's possible he was deprived of oxygen. But the most horrifying detail was a footprint, not on the floor, but on Michael's throat. Missy MacIvor's body was found in the master bedroom. It lay on a cream-colored blanket thrown from the bed onto the floor. The woman was completely undressed. Her hands and feet were bound with clothesline and wrapped with painter's tape. Her fingers were clenched into fists, indicating severe pain before death. A black belt was wrapped several times around her neck, and her hair was tangled into a dense knot. Her eyes, like Michael's, were hastily covered with pieces of painter's tape. Under the blanket on which the homeowner lay, investigators found a nightgown with torn-out buttons and underwear cut into pieces by something sharp. Apparently, Missy had been sexually assaulted. In the bedroom, detectives found a .22 caliber pistol casing and a hole in the curtains. The sliding glass door leading to the terrace was open, and a fan was still running in the room. It was humid and hot. Phone cables in the house had been cut. The perpetrator had planned everything. During such bad weather, all the MacIvor's neighbors were indoors. Due to thunder, strong winds, and rain noise, no one heard any screams. The homeowners were prevented from seeking help by other means. Based on the initial examination, detectives surmised this was not a random burglar. The attack was clearly planned. But why was a couple expecting a child the main target? Who could they have crossed that the perpetrator didn't even spare an unborn baby? The metal rod wrapped in a towel found on the kitchen floor was among the pieces of evidence. In the bedroom dresser, investigators discovered clotheslines similar to that restraining Missy's hands and feet. This suggested the perpetrator used items found in the house rather than bringing them along. A notebook with torn-out pages was also among the evidence. It had previously contained alphabetically ordered addresses and phone numbers. This could indicate that the attack was committed by someone acquainted with the MacIvors. Nothing was stolen. Jewelry boxes remained in place with all contents intact. Household appliances and the TV also didn't interest the criminal. However, a long ladder was leaning against the glass-enclosed veranda on the second floor outside. Most likely, the perpetrator climbed it to the second floor and entered one of the bedrooms through sliding doors. Outside, investigators found tire tracks and several footprints in the sand. Due to the recent storm, the sand was too wet to make a cast, so forensics limited themselves to photographing the print for future comparison with suspects' shoes. The contractor doing renovation work was first on this list. The long ladder belonged to him. He knew the layout of the rooms and could have seen where things were kept. However, before proceeding with the investigation, they had to inform the relatives already gathering at the MacIvor's house that Michael and Missy were dead. Sharon noticed from afar the yellow tape typically used to cordon off crime scenes stretched around her brother's house, and her heart sank. Her whole body went numb at once. On unsteady legs, she approached closer and saw the parents who had arrived before her. The horrific news instantly shattered the peaceful life of the gated community. No one wanted to believe it had really happened. Michael's parents, aged years in one morning, only knew that their son and daughter-in-law were no longer alive. This is what they told Sharon as she approached. Michael's sister couldn't understand how this was possible. as just a couple of days ago she had been in this house, seen the nursery, and discussed with Missy where to put things in their future son's room, and now none of them were alive. After Sharon, Michael's two brothers, James and Tim, arrived at the house. The most incredible coincidence was that August 22nd was Tim's birthday. The terrible surprise left by the criminal would now overshadow this once joyous occasion for the rest of his days. Tim had been so proud of introducing Michael and Missy, happy that everything was going well for them, and now he felt nothing but emotional pain. Meanwhile, the victims' bodies were sent to the medical examiner's office for autopsies. The saddest part was that not 2, but 3 people had died. Little Kyle Patrick MacIvor lived for about 30 minutes after Missy's death. He was quite viable, but it was not meant for him to enter this world. The cause of Michael's death was a blow to the head with a heavy object followed by strangulation. The assailant likely stunned the man with the metal rod wrapped in a towel when he came down to investigate a noise. Bruises on the homeowner's neck showed that a rope had been wrapped around it several times and pulled back with full force. He was conscious for a maximum of 15 seconds. Additionally, several vertebrae were broken. This occurred because the perpetrator stepped on Michael's throat with full force, which is why a boot print was left on his neck. Internal bleeding in the left shoulder and significant bruising in the abdominal area also indicated that Michael was struck not only on the head. External examination of Missy revealed ligature marks on her neck. The woman fought for her life and tried to loosen the rope, causing friction. Her agony lasted longer because she managed to delay her death. Either the criminal cut off her air supply and she lost consciousness, or when he loosened the rope, Missy regained consciousness. The lower part of her body was covered with small cuts. The expectant mother resisted as much as she could, not wanting to risk her baby's health. After the attack, she was left there to die alone. The pathologist was able to obtain DNA samples from seminal fluid left on Missy's body and on sheets in the MacIvor's house. This significantly facilitated identifying the perpetrator. However, another DNA sample was needed for comparison, as the police found no matches in their database. Detectives began compiling a list of potential suspects. First on it was the contractor performing construction work at the MacIvor's house. His surname began with a letter from the address book page that was missing. The worker was fully prepared to cooperate, but he was angered that some evidence pointed directly at him. Both Michael and Missy had become close to him. Therefore, the man was upset that he was suspected of attacking his friends. His boot prints were left in the sand near the house. He knew how to enter unnoticed, and it was his long ladder leaning against the terrace. Fortunately, he had an alibi. Additionally, the contractor agreed to provide a DNA sample, and it did not match the DNA found at the crime scene. Detectives learned that Missy had called her sister Marcia around 10:30 p.m., but she wasn't home. A message was left on the answering machine, with Missy promising to call back the next day. This provided investigators with a clue about the events of that terrible night. It appeared the MacIvors were alive at 10:30 p.m. The storm began around 5 p.m. and continued until midnight, intensifying each hour. The hurricane peaked in the second half of the night. Phone lines were cut shortly after Missy's call to her sister. Relatives also informed detectives that Missy had been married before Michael. Since the crime seemed very personal and largely directed against the woman, police decided to question the ex-husband living in Miami. Due to extensive media coverage of the MacIvor family tragedy investigation, it was known in other states. A doctor who knew Missy's former husband called the police. He reported that the man was unhappy about the divorce and genuinely upset upon hearing Missy had remarried and was pregnant. Apparently, he still had some attachment to his first wife. Investigators now focused on gathering more information about this person and discovered he had a criminal record for petty theft. In the absence of other suspects, the ex-husband seemed an ideal fit for the perpetrator. He could have become enraged and committed the crime. During questioning, the man denied everything, insisting he had no connection to the attack on Missy and Michael. He also had an alibi for that night. He was in Miami and couldn't have been near the MacIvor's house. The former husband was genuinely shocked when he learned of his first wife's death. He willingly provided a DNA sample, which showed no match. The investigation again reached a dead end. The Tavernier community, accustomed to living safely, began locking doors, buying weapons for protection, and installing home security systems. People feared the criminal might live nearby and didn't want to share the MacIvor family's fate. Despite residents' pressure on authorities, the investigation stalled. Almost a year passed. Investigators checked all possible leads, questioned several more suspects, but DNA results didn't match. They had to start over. It was then that detectives decided to delve deeper into Michael MacIvor's professional activities. Perhaps the businessman was actually the perpetrator's potential target. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you like this video. It's really important. Detectives learned that Michael spent much time traveling the world as a pilot. Relatives working in the aviation industry shared suspicions that Michael might have been involuntarily involved in a dangerous and illegal scheme. The private airstrip behind the house could have attracted people engaged in transporting illegal substances. Michael, dreaming of a tropical paradise for his family, might have been forcibly drawn into smuggling. He had always dreamed of earning big money, and this could have brought him financial stability. But something went wrong, and Michael was killed. Alternatively, he might have refused to participate, paying with his life and the lives of those he loved most. Investigators now questioned whether MacIvor's business was somehow linked to illegal activities. Could aircraft repair be just a cover for something much more serious? The day before the incident, Michael's brother James had given him all his savings to buy a plane in Belize at an excellent price. Michael went there to make the deal. This transaction was legal. The plane, seized from drug dealers, was being sold by the police department through an auction. All this hype, supplemented by inaccurate assumptions from reporters, caused a wave of condemnation of Michael's actions. Although it later turned out that the deal was legal, and MacIvor was in no way connected to smuggling, the family, already in mourning, received a considerable amount of negative attention. Their son's reputation was tarnished without any objective evidence. Losing Michael along with his wife and unborn child was a terrible tragedy, and portraying him as a smuggler was beyond the pale. Investigators spent a lot of time developing this theory, but it all turned out to be empty speculation, unsupported by any objective evidence. Instead of abandoning this theory, detectives decided to investigate the activities of Michael's brother James. What if he was involved in transporting illegal substances and Michael was blackmailing him? When James MacIvor noticed he was being followed, he came to the police station and simply provided a DNA sample to put an end to all these rumors about illegal business. Naturally, no matches were found, and the family was left alone, with investigators deciding to look elsewhere. Detectives spent 2 years investigating the illegal drug trafficking angle and were now completely at a loss. They decided to involve the FBI. A criminal profile was created, which differed significantly from all previous suspects. A crucial factor was what this person did to a woman who was 8 months pregnant. Not everyone is capable of such a heartless crime. It requires a certain personality type. The profiler suggested that the perpetrator was obsessed with Missy. He likely had previous experience with home invasions, knowing what actions to take. Michael's presence at home didn't concern him at all. He was determined to get to Missy at any cost. The criminal had been observing the woman, knew her daily routine and the layout of the house. The FBI concluded that this man was a local resident who might have crossed paths with Missy during the day. Therefore, they began looking for someone with a criminal past who had some contact with the deceased woman. In the final months of her pregnancy, Missy visited the same places: grocery store, hospital, gas station, and the school where she continued teaching. She spent most of her time at home preparing for the baby's arrival. Police began investigating the identities of employees at places Missy MacIvor frequented most in recent months, paying special attention to those with criminal backgrounds, including burglary or violent crimes. Detectives also spoke with relatives, and Sharon remembered Missy casually mentioning a guy at the local gas station who tried to hit on her despite her pregnancy. This gas station was the closest to the MacIvors' home. Missy passed by it every morning and stopped for coffee on her way to work. Investigators revisited evidence found at the crime scene and noticed several gas station receipts among them. Finally, the police had another potential suspect. This man was named Thomas Mitchell Overton. He was allegedly involved in several burglaries and was linked to an attack on a 20-year-old girl that ended in her death. The crime, committed in May 1990, remained unsolved. Rachel Surratt, the girl's name, was last seen when her father dropped her off at a local cinema in Tavernier. 2 weeks later, tourists stumbled upon her body wrapped in a tarp in the woods. She had previously told her father about a guy working at the cinema who constantly harassed her. The most shocking part was that Thomas Overton once worked at this place. He was under suspicion, but no evidence of his involvement in the girl's death was found. Rachel and Missy looked somewhat similar, and both women openly rejected Thomas's advances, further strengthening investigators' suspicions. However, the problem was that detectives couldn't simply ask the man to provide a DNA sample without legal grounds, and 36-year-old Thomas Overton was unlikely to voluntarily incriminate himself. So the police decided to wait until the suspect committed another crime. 6 months later, an officer spotted an oddly dressed individual cycling at 3 a.m. The policeman checked the person's ID, revealing him to be Thomas Overton. Approximately 15 minutes after, the station received a call from a young woman reporting an intruder in her home. The perpetrator had fled, but left a lipstick message on the bathroom mirror, threatening to end the homeowner's life next time. Subsequently, another incident occurred where Thomas was actually arrested for trespassing, but as it wasn't a felony, they had to release him. Law enforcement continued surveillance, albeit with less fervor than before. No new developments in the MacIvor family case emerged until 1996. 5 years had passed since the couple's demise when a close associate of Thomas, a criminal seeking to become an informant to clear his own charges, aided the investigation. He notified the police that Thomas was planning another robbery, providing the house address and timing of the intended crime. Officers set up an ambush, enabling them to apprehend Thomas as he was cutting phone lines. A firearm was found on him. As a convicted felon in Florida was prohibited from possessing a gun, this served as an additional grounds for his arrest. On October 6, 1996, Thomas Mitchell Overton was apprehended on charges of burglary. Investigators hoped to obtain a DNA sample, but the suspect refused to provide it voluntarily. Acquiring a warrant would have taken several months, and Thomas seemingly anticipated the consequences for him. At one point, while still in custody, the man attempted to harm himself by deliberately slashing his throat with a disposable razor. He intended to be taken to the hospital and make an escape. From the towels used to stanch the injured man's bleeding, a DNA sample was collected. In November 1996, Thomas's DNA was compared to the DNA found on a bedding sample from the MacIvor residence. The blood matched. On October 17, 1998, 2 years after his arrest, Thomas Overton's trial commenced. DNA evidence was presented in court along with testimony from 2 witnesses, fellow inmates who had shared a cell with the suspect at different times. One of them claimed Thomas admitted to committing burglaries in an affluent area of the Florida Keys and taking someone's life. He also shared his usual security measures for burglaries, cutting phone lines, wearing gloves, carrying a gun and knife, and using disguises. To another inmate, Thomas Overton allegedly said the best time for robbery was during power outages or bad weather. He then told an implausible story, insisting that Missy MacIvor behaved erratically at a gas station when encountering him. Some days she was pleasant, smiling, and even flirting, while other days she acted like a witch. After glimpsing Missy's address on a gas receipt, Thomas began observing the MacIvor home. On August 21, 1991, the criminal decided to execute his terrible plan. He cut the phone lines and placed a ladder against the balcony. This action made some noise, and lights came on in the house. After waiting for quiet, he climbed the ladder and entered through a guest bedroom. While examining the premises, he heard Michael, the homeowner, wake up and go to the kitchen refrigerator. Thomas panicked and stealthily approached from behind, striking the man's head with an iron rod found in one of the rooms. Michael didn't immediately lose consciousness, so the intruder punched him several times to knock him out. At that moment, he noticed Missy, who had witnessed everything. The lady of the house tried to hide in the bedroom. According to Thomas, he caught up with her and bound her with items from a dresser, then attempted to persuade her to cooperate, but Missy said she knew who he was. Meanwhile, the perpetrator worried Michael might regain consciousness. He returned to the living room, covered the unconscious man's eyes with socks, and wrapped his head with masking tape. Thomas couldn't resist taking advantage of Missy's helplessness, having been attracted to her earlier at the gas station. He violated her, then tightened a rope around the woman's neck and took her life, planning to leave no witnesses. Afterwards, the criminal returned to the living room and ended Michael MacIvor's life. In his conversations with other inmates, Thomas claimed he knew nothing about a bullet hole in the curtains, and that he deliberately tore pages from a notebook to confuse investigators. He then confessed that his goal wasn't robbery, but to obtain Missy's body. On March 18, 1999, 8 years after the attack on the MacIvor family, 41-year-old Thomas Overton was found guilty and sentenced to death for the slaughter of 3 people, including the unborn Kyle Patrick MacIvor. After the sentence was announced, Thomas turned to face the crowd and smiled. He mockingly waved at Michael's sister Sharon, suggesting he'd gladly do the same to her. Michael's parents couldn't bear the heavy loss. Soon after the case concluded, they passed away one after another, following their son. Thomas Overton, who robbed an entire family of their future, still remains on death row awaiting execution, feeling quite content with himself. This is the end of the story. Like the video and leave your thoughts in the comments. This was Jeremy. See you soon.